the spread of the pandemic. They know if there is a coronavirus breakout, Gaza's healthcare system will be rapidly overwhelmed, unable to provide even basic care. And because Gaza is effectively an open-air prison, no one will be able to leave. So the situation in Gaza is really tough. Today, 95% of the population of Gaza lack direct access to clean water. So don't tell the Gaza people keep washing your hands every few minutes. They hardly have enough water to drink or to cook with. 1 million people rely on food aid to survive. 70% of young people are unable to find employment. And because of the blockade, Gaza's hospital and clinics lack 42% of essential drugs and medicines. So, you know, this is the situation in Gaza. But the real situation in Gaza is due to the blockade of Gaza. And you can see here the map of Gaza. And from all sides, Gaza is totally locked. From the north, you can see where you see the word Eretz, locked by Israel. From the east, locked by Israel. From the south, it is locked by Egypt. And from the sea, it's locked by Israeli gunboats and so on. So you have about a little bit over 2 million Gazans living in a virtual in a real prison. That's the situation in Gaza. Now, I had the chance to minister in Gaza because when I was the head of the Shepherd Society in Bethlehem, almost every week I would go to Gaza to teach a class and also to take care of humanitarian concerns. And especially I went to Gaza after every bombing. You know, like in 2009, 2012, 2016, Gaza has been bombed by the Israelis, and I would go to deliver medical aid and funds for the people in Gaza. But this is what I saw. This is actually a makeshift camp that Gazans have to live in after their houses have been destroyed. So the next one will be, here you can see, actually this is my picture talking with the Gazans who are living in these refugee camps, trying to give them comfort and whatever aid the Shepherd Society was able to give. But I took this picture which really shows what Israel is doing in Gaza, trying to bring the people in Gaza, the land of Gaza back into the Stone Age. They don't want the people, they don't want to have Gazans as neighbors, and they are doing everything to destroy the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. And here you can see after the 2016 bombing of Gaza, I mean, the situation was really terrible. My heart, you know, would break every time I went to Gaza and I have to see these pictures. Of course, I left the country in 2015, but I continue to follow up, especially the news about what we call the Great March of Return. Gazans went to the border with Israel to try to say enough is enough. We want freedom. You notice these people, none of them have a gun. There are no tanks. There are no helicopters. There are no pistols. They just took tires in order to burn them and make smoke, just to say to the Israelis, enough is enough. And this picture shows the Israeli response. The Israelis shower them with gunfire, with bombs, with poisonous gases, and whatever. It was really awful, and many, many people, men, women, and children were killed. Again, if you look at these people, none of them have a gun, none of them have a weapon on them. It was totally non-violent march to the border. And the Israeli response also was shoot to kill. They shot Gazans as if they were animals trapped in a cage. Many were killed. And the Israeli soldiers later on would brag about how many Palestinians they killed, or how many eyes they took out, or how many legs they took out through their killing. But nobody was safe. Children were killed. Journalists, nurses, hospital workers, medic people were also killed and suffered a lot. So this is why Gaza is in the situation as it is. We need to pray for Gaza, and we need to do everything to tell the story of Gaza to the rest of the world. Jonathan, will you continue, please?
Yes. Alex spoke about Gaza, which is like a big, huge open air prison. Most people in the West Bank, most people in the West also understand the issues about the West Bank and the settlements there, as well as East Jerusalem. But I don't think people understand that the Zionist movement and the State of Israel has this multi-fanged approach. Not only are they fragmenting the Palestinians into 5 different groups and insisting on treating each group differently, which is the process, of course, of divide and conquer, but also everything that they do with the Palestinian is governed by this, the parameters of demography and land. They want to take as much land as possible and to take in as few people as possible, because that's the only way they think they can preserve the Jewishness of the Jewish state of Israel. When they captured the occupied territories in 1967, one of the first things they did was annex East Jerusalem. But annexation was not just annexation. It was to bring that area under full Israeli sovereignty without giving the population Israeli citizenship. So they created a new category for East Jerusalemites, that they are residents but not citizens. I happen to be one of those people who are a resident but not a citizen. What does that mean? That means for certain purposes, we are part of Israel. For other purposes, we are part of the occupied territories in the West Bank, and we have no rights of citizens. When coronavirus hit, Israel made it very clear that they don't want the Palestinian Authority to exercise any contact or any responsibility or any activities in East Jerusalem. They actually closed down 2 efforts to start a corona clinic, or to start to do some testing, or to start providing some kind of pandemic related services. And they told everybody, this is part of Israel, you should have nothing to do with it. At the same time, they did not provide to East Jerusalemites the kind of support, medical care, testing, guidance, facilities that they provided to the rest of Israelis. This is also true for Israeli Arabs. Now, with Israeli Arabs, I'm using the term that the Israelis use. They call them Israeli Arabs. Basically, they are Palestinians who are citizens of the state of Israel. So they have citizenship, but they don't have full rights. Today, there are about 22% of the citizens of Israel are Arab. And yet Arabic as a language and their rights as a people are totally degraded all the time. It wasn't until, I think, about 3 weeks ago that they even had any instructions in Arabic. They had them in Hebrew, of course, English, Amharic, a lot of other languages, but not in Arabic for the citizens of Israel who are Arabic speaking. And only recently did they allow one testing station in an Arab area. In many of the Arab areas and many of the other areas, there is no testing available. There are no services available. The curious thing, however, is that of the medical personnel in Israel who are on the front lines of fighting the pandemic, more than 30% are Arab. And the Israeli press is always full of records about how Arabs are Jews and Jews are together fighting the pandemic, which is true. Arabs and Jews are fighting the pandemic. But as far as the state of Israel is concerned, their concerns are mostly for the Jewish and not the Arab population. Yeah, this is why it's, when we talk about the upcoming danger of annexation, we have to understand it completely within this paradigm. Israel wants to take and keep all of the occupied territories. It does not want to take or keep the population. So what do? They have to come up with a plan that allows them to annex the land, but not the people. That is why the upcoming maps, and we've seen some of them that have been bandied about, they're talking about annexing portions of Area C. Area C is 62% of the West Bank territory today. Area C is largely land with very, very few people living in it. And therefore, they are ripe opportunity for Israel to grab it. They'd really like to grab everything. And in fact, they are exercising de facto sovereignty over the entire area. But they don't want to take up the responsibility for the population. That is why they are keeping the Palestinian Authority. They want the Palestinian Authority to take the responsibility, but not have the power or the authority over that area. This is basically the question of annexation. Annexation, as the Israelis see it, is only the application of Israeli law and administration over different portions of the occupied territories without, in fact, granting citizenship or equality to those people. Alex?
Okay, so who wants this annexation that we are talking about? And it's very simple. Here I made a list of the parties who are really eager about annexation. The Israeli right, the ultra-right movements in Israel, the settlers, of course, Netanyahu, and Gantz is no less excited about the annexation than Netanyahu. White evangelicals in the United States, about 80% of them are totally for annexation. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we come to the religious aspect. And of course, extreme Zionists, especially in the United States, some of them are billionaires who have a lot of money to contribute to congressmen and women and senators and so on. So in a way, these are the people who are totally for annexation. However, let's have this one. Voices against annexation. Would you like to handle it, Jonathan?
Yes. I think almost the entire world, most of humanity, most countries, the United Nations, the European Union, the Islamic and the Arab countries, human rights organizations throughout the world, as well as J Street, Jewish Voice for Peace, and a majority of Jewish people in this country are also against annexation. Even mainline Christian denominations and some of the leading figures in the Democratic Party, like Senator Sanders, are against annexation. Annexation really is a problem for most of them because it violates international law clearly. It doesn't have any justification, security or otherwise. It complicates and renders almost totally impossible the idea of a peaceful solution along the lines of two states. Because how can you have two states if you're constantly grabbing bits and pieces of the area that's supposed to be a Palestinian state and 22% of the West Bank? So many people are opposed to annexation for different reasons. And the only people who really want the annexation are the most extreme portions of people.
I want to make a comment. If you like this PowerPoint presentation and if you can use it or use some of it, Jonathan and I will be very glad to email it to you if we can if you can make contact with us. But whatever material we have, we are always willing to share it with people who are activists and people who want to talk more about Palestine to other groups. So Jonathan was talking about consequences of annexation, and you can tell it's going to be horrible. I mean, humanity is horrible for humanity as a whole. And actually, it's only very few people in the world who are really for annexation. And we need to explain that to our American brothers and sisters, that it shouldn't be normal. Annexation should not be normal because it is not good for humanity. Not only it's bad for Palestinians, but it's bad for Americans, it's bad for Israelis, it's bad for everybody. Okay, Jonathan, you are the best to talk about this thing, annexation and the deal of the century.
Okay. To understand the deal of the century, you have to really start with the Oslo process. The Oslo process was thought by many people to be the beginning of a two-state solution. You create a Palestinian Authority, you give it some power for an interim period. In 1994, the interim agreement was signed between Israel and the PLO. They created a Palestinian Authority. They say in the beginning, you should just concentrate on the heavily populated areas. And slowly we will expand your territory and your power until you become a full state. We will leave the hard issues, 5 issues, till the end. The issue of Jerusalem, what to do about Jerusalem, how do we share it? The issue of refugees and the right of return, the issue of settlements and settlers and what to do about them, the issue of the final borders, where the state is going to be, and finally the issue of security. How do we keep security for the Israelis? What provisions are done? These issues were supposed to be resolved within the first 5 years. That's why it was called an interim agreement. Now it's been 25 years because Israel stopped following the process. They cut off Gaza from the West Bank, even though the Oslo Agreement said they have to be part of the same area. They stopped expanding the authority of the Palestinian Authority. In fact, they started contracting it. They started acting as if the Palestinian Authority was just a sub-agent doing their bidding. They have to carry out within Area A Israel's wishes, otherwise they would strangle it. And it became a more or less a permanent situation. Trump, when he came, he said, look, I will give Israel everything it wants. Instead of this being a temporary arrangement, we will make it a permanent arrangement. Each of these 5 issues that were still to be determined, I will determine them unilaterally on Israel's benefit. Jerusalem, let's make it clear, it's all for Israel. The Palestinians have nothing in Jerusalem. Nothing. They have a few neighborhoods outside the fence in Abu Dis and Aizariya, they can call it Jerusalem if they want, and they can make it their capital. Refugees, there is no right of return. There is no such thing as refugees. We will kill UNRWA. We will pretend that they are not a problem for, not pretend. They actually say they are not a problem for Israel. They will have to solve their problem in the Arab world. And we'll give the Arab world some money to do that. 3, security. Israel will have complete security even within Area A to do whatever it wants. What issues are there remaining? There are no issues. Basically, Trump said, if the Palestinians do everything that Israel wants, then maybe they can call themselves a state if they want to, who cares? But we will not give them actual power or sovereignty. So Palestinians said, well, wait a minute, this is not what we're talking about. This is not what international law calls. This is not what our self-determination means. There's nothing. If you do this, we'll give you some money. If you don't, we're going to do it anyway. So Trump's plan was a total, not only a total non-starter for Palestinians and for the rest of the world, it was also basically a confirmation that the status quo will continue as Israel wants it.
Thank you, Jonathan. And notice on the map, it says vision for peace. And I heard Netanyahu talking the other day on TV, and he talked about the, expropriated the Palestinian land, the annexation of the Jordan River Valley. And he was talking to Israelis, and he said, this is how we are going to make peace with the Palestinians. I just cannot believe it, that they are using the word peace as they are stealing land here and there. But, this is the situation that we have. Okay, so for us as Palestinians, some of you who are listening to me are Palestinians or married to Palestinians or related to Palestinians. How can we as Palestinians respond to these injustices? I think we need to, first of all, I do believe, and I know Jonathan agrees with me, that we need to resist non-violently. I mean, we cannot fight Trump and fight Netanyahu and the Israeli government in non-violent means. We have tried for many, many years to resist violently, and it did not work. And I think, just like South Africa, like India, like any other country, even the former Soviet Union, I believe we can win this war, but we have to win it non-violently. We need to have a clear vision of the future that we as Palestinians want. Do we want one state or two states? Of course, maybe it is hard for us to decide, and most Palestinian NGOs cannot really now decide. What they are deciding is that we need justice. We are not seeking one state or two states. We are seeking justice, equity, democracy for both Israelis and Palestinians. Immediate reconciliation and unity among warring Palestinian factions. I mean, if I would whisper in Mahmoud Abbas's ears, I would tell him, go immediately to Gaza and reconcile with Hamas. And I would say the same thing to Hamas officials, to reconcile with the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. They need each other. Mahmoud Abbas is more vulnerable than the leaders of Hamas because Israel doesn't care about Hamas in the long run. They really care more about the West Bank. They want to take the West Bank and they want to get rid of the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian leader will be better off to reconcile and strengthen himself by reconciling with Hamas. Also call for elections under the supervision of international agencies. Palestinians will get legitimacy if they have free elections that is supervised by the United Nations or by international agency. And then I would say to my Palestinian brothers and sisters everywhere in the world, never give up. Never give up. Jonathan, you want to handle the next slide, please?
I really think that time is catching up with us, Alex. And I think it is very important for us to give the audience at least a review of a biblical alternative to Christian Zionism.
Okay.
I think many activists give up on evangelicals too soon. Evangelicals are very decent people who believe the Bible to be true and who take the Bible literally. And therefore, they are sometimes duped by people who just use a few verses here and there in order to mislead them. So if you will spend a few minutes, Alex, at least introducing the audience to your PowerPoint presentation from a biblical point of view.
Okay, for those who are not aware, I just want to give a brief definition of Christian Zionism, and then I will give a biblical alternative to Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is the wedding of theology and politics that has been in vogue for over 100 years. It believes that the modern secular state of Israel is a continuation of biblical Israel, and that today's Israel enjoys political and spiritual privileges not shared by any other nation on earth. This definition of Christian Zionism came to us by Professor Gary Burge. So, what does the Bible say about the situation in Palestine, about the land of Palestine, about rebuilding a temple, and all the things that Christian Zionists are talking about? In order to respond to this question, I came up with this chart. It's called the Two Covenants chart of comparison. If you look at the top line, you see the nation, the land, the city, the temple, the priesthood, the sacrifice. The middle line, you see Israel, promised land, Jerusalem, temple, Levitical priesthood, animal sacrifice. And the bottom line, you see all believers, kingdom of God, New Jerusalem, house of the believers, Christ, and the believers, Jesus Christ. Now, be patient with me. I'll try to explain. Now, if you would look vertically instead of horizontally, the nation in the Old Testament, it was Israel. But when we start reading the New Testament, it talks about all believers are God's people. Wherever you read in the New Testament, you know, if I have the chance, I would quote you one verse of the Bible after the other that shows that all of us are God's children, all of us are chosen by God, and not specifically only one group of people who are Israelis. Then we go to the land. And in the Old Testament, it was promised land for one people, the Jewish people. When we come to the New Testament, Jesus never talked about the promised land for anybody. He talks about the kingdom of God for all of us. And when they ask him, where is your kingdom? He said, my kingdom is within you. And then we go to the city. The next one is the city. Let me see. I believe, yeah, this is the city. In the Old Testament, Jerusalem, no question about it in the thinking of the Old Testament. But when we come to the New Testament, we talk about a new Jerusalem coming from heaven. The next one will be the temple. In the Old Testament, it was a building in Jerusalem. But when we come to the New Testament, it is in the hearts of the believers, no matter where they are in the world. Then we come to the priesthood. In the Old Testament, there was Leviticus priesthood, but in the New Testament, Christ became our eternal high priest. And finally, the sacrifice in the Old Testament was animal sacrifices. In the New Testament, Jesus Christ became the ultimate sacrifice. Now, if we understand this as Christians, then it is easy for us to explain them to our Christian Zionist brothers and sisters, because if we stay right here in the middle, we are really going back to the Old Testament. But as Christians, we are right here, and that's what we need to explain to Christian Zionists. And right here, this is not replacement theology, because God does not replace people with another people, but it is really enlargement theology, which means that God, in his grace and his mercy, accept all of us. So this is really brief because we don't have time, but hopefully, if you want more information about this, we can send you the chart, we can send you all the verses that are connected to it. Forgive me for doing it so fast. And here we now have signs of hope. Jonathan, would you deal with, do you have any hope, Jonathan?
Yes, lots of hope.
All right.
I think that the problem of Israel and Palestine needs to be looked at with new eyes. In many ways, the two-state solution prevented us from looking at it with new eyes. We thought that we could keep the same structure, but limit it to 78% of Palestine to be a state of Israel, a Jewish state, and 22% of Palestine, an Arab state of Palestine. And so for the last 50 years, we were juggling these two concepts and trying to preserve the 22% without actually dealing with the reality. And the reality is that today, in the 21st century, you no longer can have concepts like apartheid. You no longer can have concepts like ethnic cleansing. You no longer can have a system where one group has a set of rights and another group living in the same country have another set of rights. That is no longer possible. And there are some good signs that people no longer are accepting this. Much of my hope comes from the fact that there are Israelis and there are particularly Jews throughout the world, in the United States, who see that this is no longer sustainable, whose faith in equality, whose faith in democracy, whose faith in human rights and human dignity is more important than a tribal, territorial idea of this is mine, this is not yours, this belongs to me. We must, of course, accept and respect the past and the religion and the nationality and the traditions, but we cannot allow injustice like this to continue. So I have great hope because of the Israeli and the Jewish people who believe in peace. I have great hope because there are so many countries in the world who are saying Palestinians deserve self-determination and statehood. I have a sign of hope in the fact that the Palestinians, with every possible thing working against them, continue to believe in Palestine and in their rights and are moving towards using nonviolence rather than trying to outgun and outviolence and outshoot the Israelis. So I have signs of hope because of churches in the United States, including evangelical churches. We have evangelical leaders and evangelical churches who, once they see the situation and once they understand the theology behind it, will tell you that our God is a God of justice. We can no longer accept a racial understanding of how do we understand concepts like chosen people, like promised land, like understanding prophecies and end times. All these concepts have to be understood through new eyes, through New Testament, through Jesus's eyes. And when we do that, when we look at it through a new eye, I think we will find a basis for justice, a basis for peace, a basis for hope, for coexistence, both for Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs. I think it is possible. and I'm full of hope that this can happen. I mean, this very event that we are holding, the fact that all of you are listening to this presentation is itself a sign of hope. We don't give up. We don't think that it's Netanyahu and Trump and Adelson who will have the last word. We believe that justice will, in the end, prevail. Like Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And we will do our part to bend that arc towards justice.
Okay, this slide here is about demography. Jonathan, you want to say a word about demography?
Yes, in many ways, demography is on the side of justice. The Israelis thought that they could just get rid of Palestinians, that the older generation will die and the young generation will forget, and there will be no such thing as Palestinians, that Palestinians will be absorbed into the countries where they went to. In many ways, by rejecting the two-state solution, by their greed in capturing all of Palestine, I think the Zionist movement basically undermined the idea of a Jewish state. Israel can no longer be a purely Jewish state unless it follows strictly apartheid rules. The Jews have certain rights which Arabs do not have. And like I said, the world no longer accepts this idea. Today, in the state that is controlled by Israel, from the river and the sea, there's pretty much close to 50-50, with the Arabs having a little bit advantage. Slightly more than 50% of the people living in historic Palestine are not Jewish. They are Arab Palestinians. So unless the solution accommodates them as well as the Israeli Jews, it is not going to work.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. And you know, I just want to say again that you are welcome to this presentation, whether you take it as it is, or whether you want the PowerPoint presentation or the chart about theology. Jonathan and I are very happy and willing to share the material that we have. And if you know of a group who would like to hear us in another state, in another even country, we are willing to share our time to try to help people understand the situation in the Holy Land. Thank you. And we are now ready for the questions and answers.
Oh my, there's a lot of questions already on the chat. People have been both commenting and asking questions. I will look at them and try to...
Maybe Sam, maybe this is Sam's job, Jonathan, to lead us. Yeah, go ahead, Sam. Either Sam or Mark, whichever.
You want to summarize some of the questions or synthesize them and address them to us?
I thought Mark was working on that. Can you unmute him? Sam, this is Burhan. Can you unmute Mark?
Can you hear me now?
Here you are.
Yes. Okay, good. Yes, I want to thank both Alex and Jonathan for a very stimulating conversation, and wonderful questions have been raised. Let me try to summarize a couple of them. There are a number of questions around the question of one state emerging because of the looming annexation, and some have said, isn't it better to just recognize that Israel is already sovereign over all the land, and that annexation is coming even though we don't want it and it's a flagrant violation of international law? Isn't it better, some have asked, that we just accept that it's coming and then press Israel to grant equal rights to Palestinians? Others on the chat have said, how likely is that Israel will grant equal rights to Palestinians? Won't the one state just expose that it is apartheid? and that Palestinians will never have full dignity and equal rights, no matter what the one state, two state solution.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Well, never is a very long time.
Yes.
It is true that Israel is today one state only. It is true that Israel is exercising effective de facto sovereignty over all the land, all historic Palestine, all the land between the river and the sea. And it is also true that Israel is trying to use the two-state language to justify its discrimination. To say, well, Palestinians have their own leaders, they have their own Palestinian Authority, they have their own themselves to blame, while they are continuing to stifle the Palestinian Authority. Israel will not accept either two states or one state unless it is forced to do so, whether by internal or external means. Israel must be forced to give up its control, its apartheid, its privilege. Now, no privileged group gives up that authority unless it is required or forced to do so through external or internal pressures. The unique thing about Israel is that it wants its cake and eat it too. It wants to be thought of as a modern, secular, democratic state. It wants to be part of the enlightened world. It wants to be part of Europe. It wants to be part of the West. But it wants to, at the same time, act as an apartheid state, as a fully authoritarian, powerful country that rules its own people and doesn't care what international law or human rights law requires it to do. So in many ways, the annexation speeds up the process of requiring Israel to work towards human rights and towards equality. And it clarifies things for many people in the West get so bogged up. Oh, this is so complicated. We don't understand it. There is Area A, B, and C, and there's Gaza, the West Bank. We don't understand. It's simple. It is very simple. Equality, full equality, genuine equality is what is required.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I would like to add that annexing the Jordan River Valley will not bring equal rights and democracy to Palestinians. So those people who think that if Israel annexes all, then it would lead to a one state. Well, in their mind, in the Israeli mind, it will be an apartheid state, full apartheid state, and they will not accept. And also, once Israel takes a piece of a territory from the Palestinians, let's say the Jordan River Valley, then when Israel starts building and developing these lands, it will give Israel legitimacy because, you know, it is now part of the state of Israel, legally part of the state of Israel. So now, when Israel is doing anything in these territories, we say this is illegal, this is against international law. But with annexation, at least in the minds of the Israelis, it will give them legitimacy, but it will not give the Palestinians any rights or any democracy or any sense that this is our state and we are equal partners with the Israelis.
Okay, let me follow up with one of the questions which expresses a deep concern that with a fascist Israeli government in power and Trump still in the US, how likely is it that Israel would commit ethnic cleansing and mass murder of unarmed civilian Palestinians in the next few years? If you have fascist settlers on the mountaintops, all heavily armed, and the Palestinian Authority has done a very good job from a very cynical perspective, the Israeli and US perspective, of disarming the Palestinians for the most part. So one would say they look like sitting ducks compared to a savage government and rabid settlers. What do you think of that scenario?
Well, I already have shown, the pictures of Israeli snipers shooting and killing Palestinians in Gaza and bragging about, among themselves about the number of Palestinians they are killing. With Trump supporting Israel so much, the Israelis, it seems like they have a license now by the Trump administration to do whatever they want to do to Palestinians. And this is absolutely against international law and international legitimacy. But who cares? If Netanyahu and Trump agrees, it's okay, then it is okay. But people are not listening now to international legitimacy because it is threatened by Trump and his administration.
Yeah, I agree, but I would also like to say that that type of thinking, that we can just ethnically cleanse, or we can just do whatever we want, or we can ignore international law, is a very limited, short-sighted view. The world, for all its problems, continues to become a much better world year after year. People today understand the issue of apartheid. A century ago, 2 centuries ago, Israel could get away with all of this and with ethnic cleansing. I mean, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they got away with ethnic cleansing and replacing a local population. You can no longer do that in the 21st century. The world is a much smaller place. The world can see and notice what's happening. Israel is not strong enough and powerful enough to ignore the rest of the world. We live in an interconnected world. Even countries like North Korea, who try to totally ignore the rest of the international community, cannot live without the rest of the world, much less a country like Israel. It needs Europe, it needs the United States, it needs the rest of the world. It cannot live in total isolation. So it has to create some kind of justification. And annexation basically puts the lie to all these justifications. It becomes very clear that they want to keep it all. Massacres, yes, I think they can kill thousands of Palestinians, but they can't kill millions of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work that way anymore. I don't think.
Okay. Alex, you want to add on to that?
No, I just agree with Jonathan's sentiment that, we live in a different world, and the Israelis are taking us back to about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago in their behavior, very barbaric behavior. Even the siege of Gaza, to have a 13-year siege over Gaza, that's barbaric. That takes us back to the Middle Ages or even before. And so I really believe that the Israelis themselves need to wake up and realize what they are doing.
Okay, let me just be sure that we have some time to also engage the wonderful remarks you made about Christian Zionism. There were some comments about how we need to do a much better job of educating Christians, especially evangelical Zionists, about the realities on the ground in Palestine, and also the flaws in their biblical reading and biblical analysis. Do you have some suggestions concretely about how we can go about doing that in terms of shifting the paradigm and educating Christians? It's quite concerning to many of us that Pompeo and Pence are Christian Zionists, and even though Biden is Catholic and not many Catholics are Christian Zionists, he's a Zionist. He's a political Zionist. And so many people are concerned about how to counter CUFI, which is arguably the largest pro-Israel Zionist lobby in the country. They under John Hagee, they command millions of supporters. So just some suggestions from both of you about strategies for countering and undermining Christian Zionism and re-educating that mindset in this country.
Well, we've been inviting ourselves to Christian Zionists or sometimes evangelical communities or gatherings, universities, colleges, churches. And many evangelicals, they are Christian Zionists, but they don't know it because they don't know what Christian Zionism is all about. You know that he or she is a Christian Zionist when you start talking with him, like who does Palestine belong to? And they'll tell you it belongs to Israel. Who gave it to Israel? God gave it to Israel. And so once you start engaging them in a conversation, you know that they are Christian Zionists and their attitude toward Palestinians. But we've been inviting ourselves, and we've been welcome. Jonathan and I, we went to colleges, we went to universities, we went to small churches, to large churches. We met with them, we talked with them, and we found out that after 30, 40 minutes of dialogue with them, they start dropping and shedding some of these strange beliefs that they have, and they start shaking their heads and say, yeah, I can see your point of view. Yeah, I can understand what you are saying. And we have had really good success. So the bottom line is, many of them are really good, humble Christians who they have some kind of a cover on their eyes called Christian Zionism. And by God's grace, we can take down that cover so that they can see the light of the truth of the gospel. It's the gospel of justice and the gospel of peace for all people of the earth, not just for one nation.
Yeah, I would like to echo that and say that we have been quite successful because many evangelicals are literalists. So if you want to counter what they have been told, you have to go to the Bible and show them chapter and verse why what they say is wrong. For example, most Christian Zionists will tell you that it says in Genesis, God gave this promise to Abraham, I will bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. You are the seed of Abraham, and God will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. This is like a blessing that was given in Genesis to Abraham and his seed forever. The New Testament takes that exact same language and says, you are the seed of Abraham. You are the inheritors of the promises. And he was talking to Christians who are both Gentiles and Jewish. And he says, you are the seed of Abraham, you are the inheritors of the promises. So when you read those verses to an evangelical Christian, and you say, by God's grace, not because of what we did, we have been allowed into the family of God. We are now part of God's blessing, and we are now part of his salvation. You say, oh yes, we know that. Well, if you know that, how can you say about a secular state of Israel, about Benjamin Netanyahu, that those who support him get God's blessing? It's impossible. I say, oh yeah, you're right. We never thought about that. We never read the scripture that way. In fact, we never read the scripture at all. We just see the word Israel and we think that they're talking about the Middle East and not about the spiritual dimension. So I would strongly advise those of you who have evangelical friends or family members who believe that the Bible somehow gives territorial rights to the Jews, that the God today sort of continues to deal in a very tribal way with the Jewish people. I would really suggest that you go to Alex's chart and read the detailed, the biblical verses, word for word, how the New Testament has interpreted and expanded on the Old Testament in ways that totally undermine Christian Zionism.
Okay. There are other questions about a feeling of hopelessness about the rise of the right wing around the world and even in Europe. I think some of our folks are struggling to share your optimism, Jonathan, that there is enough residual respect for international law in the international community that there can actually be a restraining voice against Israel's excesses. Could you say, each of you say a little bit more about, I guess this gets to signs of hope, but where really is the evidence that that there will be external support of the Palestinians and external restraint against Israel? Israel has been given largely a free hand for arguably 70 years, with the U.S. Congress all tied up in obeisance to AIPAC. Where really is the hope that there will be external pressure being brought against Israel to prevent them from continuing as they have been?
Yeah, Jonathan, before you answer, I know you're ready. Hold your horses a little bit. Okay. Jonathan and I, when we were in North Carolina, we went to an African-American church. Huge, big one. And the pastor, very eloquent preacher, he stood up and he said, please, please, pray for our president. Otherwise, you will have him for another 4 years. So the idea is, Trump is here today. He's not here forever. Netanyahu is here today. He's not here forever. We believe in change, and we believe that change can be positive. And we are hoping under a different administration in the United States and under a different administration in Israel, things may go in the right direction. But I believe the big responsibility, in my opinion, is for the church in the United States. If the church people will grab a vision of peace for the Holy Land, because what is at stake is not only Palestine, but also the Christian presence in the Holy Land and in the Middle East. So the church should be invested in peace and justice in the Holy Land. And if the church in the United States wake up to its responsibility, and the church people will start electing the right people who are concerned for peace and justice, we certainly will see change. And I think it's already changes. More and more evangelicals are dropping their old ideas and coming closer to central mainline ideas about peace and justice in the Middle East. So I will stay hopeful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
My answer is in two parts. The first is a spiritual and theological part. I believe in the sovereignty of God. I believe that ultimately evil cannot remain forever, that it carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction. That ultimately, even though it appears for the moment that it's overwhelming, we are not fooled, because we know that ultimately it will fall. But the second part of my, what you call optimism, what I call hope, is a historical perspective. I know for a fact that 100 years ago, women didn't even have the vote in the United States.
Right.
I know for a fact that 150 years ago, African American were bought and sold as goods. They were not even considered human beings. So I know for a fact that the French and the Germans you know, killed millions of each other and were totally destroying each other's cities, carpet bombing. And today they are the best of friends. So I know that the outward appearances sometimes can fool you, that ultimately I have faith and I have hope that the justice will prevail. I don't know exactly when, I don't know exactly how, but I know it in a very, very basic way. And there are some signs of hope. There are some signs when I look at American Jews today. Some of the best supporters of the Palestinian rights are American Jews today, who just cannot accept the injustice that is being done and that's being attributed to them and to Judaism and to the state of Israel. And there are Israelis like that. Now, I know for a fact that the very survival of the Palestinian people today, when every factor imaginable is working against them, and they continue to live and they continue to thrive and they continue to survive and they are not giving up. That's a sign of hope. It has to be.
Yeah.
I agree with Jonathan about the resiliency of the Palestinian people. I mean, it's just amazing, you know, to see the people in Gaza so resilient in spite of so much suffering. In spite of such a barrage of bombardments and lockdown and shooting and killing and maiming, they continue to rise up and resist and say, we are here, we are Palestinians, and we will not give up. It's just amazing.
Many of us have been inspired by Palestinian Christians. I know Pastor Mitri Raheb is famous for saying he is a prisoner of hope, that this, by virtue of his Christian faith, he has no choice but to be a person of hope. So many of us share that with him and with you all. I think we want to try to wind down here in a few more minutes. There have continued to be new questions coming in. I think we've touched on many of them. If people are able to see the chat, you can see several of the comments. And there's some good questions here. Many people would like to see the PowerPoint that you have, and Alex, all of the additional biblical quotes and passages that support the charts. So
my email address is Alex E. Awad. Remember the E like an elephant. Alex E. Awad @yahoo.com.
Alex, this is Burhan.
Hey, Burhan.
Can you just send it to me and I'll pass it to the rest of the group?
Burhan, I'll be very glad to do so.
All right.
Yes, I'll do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also would like to add an important point, and it's a reminder to all of us. We need to work together. We need to build coalition, and we need to stop demonizing those who disagree with us. I know many of my activist friends, you mentioned evangelical Christians, they're hopeless. We can't even talk to them. Or so-and-so, he's a supporter of Trump. I can't even begin to talk with them. We need to find ways to talk to those people that disagree with us and to listen to them and to deal with the legitimate points if they have any legitimate points, and to answer their positions with compassion and with logic. And I think that way we can change them and we can change the world. But to cut them off and say, I can't even deal with them, they are totally beyond the pale, is not very helpful to our cause, to them or to us.
And I would add, never give up on writing to your congressman or woman. you know, there is so much power in Congress to change things in the Middle East. And yeah, if you write to your congressman or woman, you may receive, you know, a letter say, oh, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East and blah, 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 blah. But this is the time when we can say, no, don't give me this stuff. It's not true. And here are the facts. And continue the dialogue with your congressman or woman. So it's very important to reach out to the grassroots Americans, but also it's important to reach to the leaders in Congress or in the House or whatever they may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just remind us too that we've seen a noticeable shift in public opinion certainly within the Democratic Party. Palestinian rights are in the ascendancy in terms of the majority of Democrats. And we'll see if it can be reflected in the platform. But we have activists within our own network that are working locally to put resolutions through to the platform, starting locally to the state level, and then hopefully to the national level. And I think there's a strong sense that if Biden is elected, that we have our work cut out for us to pressure him to move more toward Palestinian justice and equality. So again, no one is giving up, but I think we know that it's a very steep climb, and it's wonderful to hear from both of you. We wish you the very best. We keep you in our prayers, and as you advance these ideas in your work. And we will do our part here, and we're grateful for the partnership we feel with you as we've shared this time together. Not all these questions were able to be voiced, but we'll see what we can do to get responses to everyone that raised a question. I think there were some 20 or 25 questions raised. So your presentation was well received and stimulating. We have much food for thought, and we're very grateful to both of you for being with us. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everybody who came and who listened.
Sure.
All right. That concludes our time together. Thanks to everyone.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Most welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good job, everybody. Mark, Sam, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, good night. Take care.
All right.